Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I used to work as a security guard at a hospital. It wasn't the kind of job people imagine as exciting or dramatic. Most nights were slow, quiet, and repetitive. You walked the same routes, checked the same doors, nodded at the same nurses, and tried to stay awake until your shift ended. Still, hospitals have a strange energy at night. Even when nothing is happening, it never feels completely empty. There is always the hum of machines, distant footsteps, the smell of disinfectant, and the feeling that something is happening somewhere you can't see. I worked the night shift, which meant long hours of silence broken up by routine patrols. The building was massive, with multiple wings, floors, and departments. After midnight, most of it shut down. Lights dimmed. Entire sections went dark. Patients were moved. Staff went home, and only essential areas stayed active. You learned pretty quickly which parts of the hospital should feel alive and which ones should feel abandoned. One of my regular routes took me through the surgery wing. During the day, that wing was busy, loud, and tense. Surgeons moved quickly, nurses pushed equipment carts, and families waited anxiously in hallways. At night, though, it was completely different. After a certain hour, surgery stopped. The patients were transferred to monitoring wards or recovery rooms, and the wing was closed off. The lights were lowered, doors locked, and the place felt hollow, like a set after everyone had gone home. One night, while doing my rounds, I entered the surgery wing as usual. Everything felt normal at first. The hallway lights were on but dim. The floors were spotless. Reflecting the overhead lights just enough to make the space feel longer than it really was. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the hallway, near the large whiteboard where all the scheduled surgeries were written, stood a doctor. He was wearing surgical scrubs and a coat, standing close to the board, studying it intently. His posture was calm and focused, the way doctors look when they're reviewing important information. Nothing about him looked strange or out of place at first glance. Seeing a doctor there didn't immediately raise alarms in my head. Hospitals are full of doctors, after all. Some work late. Some forget the time. Some are obsessed with their schedules. I didn't think much of it. As I walked past him, I gave a polite nod and said, "Hello, doctor." He didn't respond. He didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge me at all. He just stood there, staring at the whiteboard, as if I wasn't even there. I noticed that his attention never shifted, not even slightly. It was like I hadn't spoken. I found it a little rude, but not shocking. Hospitals have their fair share of difficult personalities, especially among surgeons. Some are stressed, some are arrogant, some are just socially awful. I shrugged it off and continued my patrol. Nothing else unusual happened on that round. I finished my route, checked the remaining doors, and headed back to the security office. The office was small, with a couple of desks, monitors showing security camera feeds, and a coffee machine that never made good coffee. One of the older guards was there, a guy who had worked at the hospital for years and knew everything about the place. We started chatting, killing time like we always did. I casually mentioned the doctor I had seen. I told him how I had greeted the guy in the surgery wing and how he completely ignored me. Half joking, I asked if that was the so-called asshole doctor everyone warned new hires about. the one who treated everyone like they were invisible. The moment I said where I saw him, the mood changed. The older guard stopped what he was doing and looked at me with a strange expression. Not concern, not confusion, a smirk. Slow and deliberate, like he had just heard something very interesting. He asked me to repeat myself. I told him again. Surgery wing. Late at night, standing at the schedule board. He leaned back in his chair and asked very calmly what time it was. I told him. That's when he explained something I should have already known, but apparently hadn't fully registered. The surgery wing closes at 9 p.m. every single night. Once it closes, all patients are moved to monitoring wards. All scheduled surgeries are done. All staff leave that wing. No doctors, no nurses, no patients. No one is supposed to be there. I laughed at first, assuming he was messing with me. I told him maybe it was a doctor working late, maybe someone checking something last minute. He shook his head. Then he asked me a very specific question. Was he looking at the schedule board? I said yes. That's when the smirk came back. He told me I had just met Dr. Lucidi. I asked who that was. The older guard explained that many years ago there had been a surgeon by that name. He was known for being dedicated to his work, obsessed even. He spent long hours in the surgery wing, often staying late, reviewing schedules, preparing for procedures, and double-checking every detail. Surgery wasn't just his job, it was his entire life. Then, one day, without warning, he went up to the helipad on the roof of the hospital and jumped off the building. No note, no explanation, just gone. After his death, strange things started happening. Security guards reported seeing a doctor in the surgery wing late at night. Always alone, always silent, always standing at the whiteboard, studying the schedule. Nurses occasionally claimed they felt watched when passing near the closed wing. Cameras sometimes showed movement in hallways that should have been empty, but nothing was ever clearly visible. Over time, staff started calling him Dr. Lucidi. Not as a joke, not casually, more like an accepted fact. The older guard told me, seems like he never stopped working. I didn't laugh this time. As he spoke, the memory replayed in my head. The stillness, the way the doctor hadn't reacted to my voice, the way he stood so close to the board, completely absorbed. The fact that I hadn't heard any footsteps besides my own. The fact that I couldn't remember hearing a door open or close. I asked why no one had warned me. He shrugged and said most people don't believe it until they see it themselves. That night, I didn't go back to the surgery wing. Not because I was ordered not to, because I didn't want to. From that point on, every time my route came near that area, I felt uneasy. Even when nothing was there, the hallway felt heavier, like it was holding on to something. The lights seemed dimmer. The silence felt thicker. I always walked a little faster, always avoided looking too closely at the whiteboard. I never saw Dr. Lucidi again, but I never forgot him either. Working night security in a hospital teaches you one thing very clearly. Buildings remember things. Trauma leaves marks. And sometimes people don't leave the places that define them, even after they're gone. And if you ever find yourself in a hospital late at night, and you see a doctor studying a schedule board in a wing that's supposed to be empty, maybe don't say hello. Just keep walking. My grandfather was very sick in the weeks leading up to his death. His illness wasn't sudden or unexpected. He had worked with asbestos for most of his life, back when people didn't fully understand how dangerous it was. Day after day, year after year, he was exposed to it, and eventually his body paid the price. By the time he was near the end, the disease had taken almost everything from him. He couldn't speak anymore, not in the normal sense. For nearly a month before he died, he hadn't said a single word. It wasn't just that talking was difficult. He couldn't communicate at all. No writing, no gestures that made sense, no clear expressions. He was still alive, still breathing, still present in the room. But it felt like he was slowly fading away while his body stayed behind. My mother spent a lot of time with him during those final days. She sat by his bed, held his hand, talked to him even though he couldn't respond. She told him stories, reassured him, reminded him that he wasn't alone. I think part of her knew he could still hear her, even if he couldn't show it. On the day he died, something changed. For the first time in weeks, he suddenly focused on my mother, really looked at her. His eyes were clearer than they had been in a long time. And then, to her absolute shock, he spoke. He said very clearly, "The angel is back." My mother froze. She hadn't heard his voice in a month. For a moment, she didn't even know how to react. She thought maybe she had imagined it, or misunderstood. She asked him what he meant. He said, "The angel is back, and this time he wants me to come with him." My mother followed his gaze. He was looking toward the corner of the room. She turned and looked, expecting something, anything. But there was nothing there. Just an empty corner, the same as it had always been. She turned back to him and said, "Dad, there's nobody there." He didn't respond. He never spoke again. He died that night. That was 20 years ago. My mother never talked about it afterward. Not casually. Not in conversation. Not even when memories of my grandfather came up. It was like that moment had been sealed away, locked up somewhere deep inside her. Years later, when my brothers and I were old enough, she sat us down individually and told us what had happened. She said she waited until we were old enough to understand it, or at least to carry it without it breaking us. She told me the story calmly, but I could see it in her eyes. That moment had never left her. My sister, though, never got to be old enough. She was sick for her entire life. From the day she was born, her life was defined by hospitals, treatments, doctors, and long stretches of uncertainty. Illness wasn't something that happened to her later. It was always there. She was incredibly brave, though she didn't know that word. To her, being sick was just normal. It was her version of life. As she got older, the doctors became more serious. The treatments became harder. My mother was eventually told the truth that no parent ever wants to hear, that her daughter's illness was terminal, that there would be no cure. That time was running out. My mother made a decision that still weighs heavily on her. She chose not to tell my sister that she was dying. She didn't want her final days filled with fear. She didn't want her lying awake at night thinking about death. Instead, she framed it as another rough period, another difficult phase, like the ones they had survived before. My sister trusted her. She believed her. In the days leading up to my sister's death, something strange started happening. She began talking about a butterfly. At first, it didn't alarm anyone. Children imagine things. They create stories to cope with pain, fear, and boredom. Given everything she was going through, it made sense that she might invent an imaginary friend to comfort herself. She talked about the butterfly casually, like it was just another part of her day. She said it would visit her. My brothers and I would sit with her and listen. We nodded along. We smiled. We asked questions. We played along because it seemed to make her happy. None of us thought it meant anything more than that. We assumed it was her way of dealing with what she was experiencing. The butterfly wasn't scary. It wasn't threatening. It sounded gentle, familiar, comforting. Then one day, everything changed. She suddenly sat straight up in bed, alert in a way she hadn't been for days. Her eyes were wide, focused on something none of us could see, and she said, "The butterfly's back, and he wants me to follow him." The room went silent. I remember looking at my mother's face. I watched the color drain from it. I watched her expression shift from confusion to recognition to absolute horror. In that moment, something clicked for her, something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Before anyone could say anything, my sister spoke again. She said, "I'm going to die, aren't I?" Her voice wasn't panicked. It wasn't scared. It was curious, calm. "That's what the butterfly said," she continued. "He told me I'm going to die." My mother broke. There was no point in lying anymore, no way to deny it. Whatever my sister had seen or understood, she already knew the truth. My mother admitted it. She told her yes, that she was going to die. My sister's reaction wasn't what anyone expected. She said, "Oh, okay." That was it. No crying, no fear, no questions, just acceptance. She lay back down in bed. My brothers, my mother, and I all climbed in around her. We held her. We cuddled her. We told her we loved her. She died like that, surrounded by the people who loved her most, quietly, peacefully. I don't know what I believe about the afterlife. I've thought about it for years. I've gone back and forth between skepticism and hope. I know there are medical explanations for end-of-life visions. I know the brain does strange things under extreme stress. I know that grief can shape how memories feel over time. But I also know what my family experienced. I know my grandfather, who hadn't spoken in a month, suddenly spoke about an angel who had come to take him away. I know my sister, who had never been told she was dying, spoke about a butterfly who told her the truth before anyone else did. I don't think those things are coincidences. Or at least, I don't know how to live with the idea that they are. There are stories all over the world, across cultures and history, about something that comes at the end. An angel, a guide, a reaper, a presence that helps people leave this life. I don't know what form it takes or if it's the same for everyone. Maybe it appears in a way each person can understand. Maybe it's shaped by belief, age, or comfort. But I have to believe there is something, because without that belief, I have no way to make sense of what I have seen. No way to carry it without it breaking me. Believing that someone or something comes to lead us away makes the idea of death feel less cruel, less empty. I don't claim to know the truth. All I know is that when the end came for the people I loved most, they didn't face it alone. And for me, that has to mean something. I worked for a while as a mortuary transport technician. It wasn't a job I ever imagined myself doing when I was younger. But life has a way of pushing you into strange directions. The work itself was straightforward, at least on paper. My job was to transport the deceased from wherever they were to wherever they needed to go next. Hospitals, nursing homes, private residences, funeral homes, medical examiners, and sometimes places for scientific donation. It sounds simple when you say it that way, but what most people don't realize is that dead people can have a lot of appointments. There was a rhythm to the job. Calls would come in at all hours, sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the early hours of the morning when the world feels half asleep. You learn to move quietly, respectfully, and efficiently. You learned how to navigate buildings most people never see at night. You learned which hallways echoed, which doors creaked, and which lights flickered if you stood under them too long. Despite what people might assume, most of the job was not creepy. It was quiet, yes. Sometimes emotionally heavy, yes. but not frightening. The dead themselves were never scary to me. If anything, they felt peaceful. Still, finished with whatever struggles they had been carrying. The unsettling part, if there was one, came from the places you went and the hours you worked. One night, I was assigned to transport someone to a science donation facility. This was where people who had chosen to donate their bodies to science were taken. Once they arrived there, the process was out of my hands. My responsibility ended with getting them inside, documented, and placed where they needed to be. The drop-off happened late, around 1 in the morning. That wasn't unusual. Most of my science donation runs happened at night. The facility was quiet, industrial, and clinical. No windows, long hallways, fluorescent lighting that made everything look pale and flat. It wasn't a place meant for comfort. It was meant for efficiency. I wheeled the deceased inside on the gurney and unlocked the large freezer where the bodies were stored. Everything inside was organized. Shelves ran along the walls, and once remains were processed, most of them were wrapped in this distinctive blue tape-like material. It wasn't meant to hide anything. In fact, you could clearly tell what was inside each package. Legs, arms, hands, feet, segments of people, neatly wrapped and labeled. At the time, I found it oddly interesting. Not in a morbid way, just in a factual one. This was science. This was anatomy. This was the human body reduced to components that could teach future doctors and researchers. After a while, things like that stop shocking you. They just become part of the environment. I placed the man I had brought in onto the board, used the lift, and slid him carefully onto the shelf. I double-checked everything like I always did. Documentation, placement, security. Then I shut the freezer door and locked it. The science drop-off and processing area was shaped like a large L. The freezer was located in the longer section of the space. Once you finished there, you turned a corner into another area with desks, filing cabinets, and administrative equipment. From there, you could wheel the empty gurney back toward the garage door where the van was parked. I turned the corner, pushing the gurney in front of me, and nearly had a heart attack. Standing there, in front of one of the file cabinets, was a man. Not a shadow. Not a reflection. Not someone partially hidden. A full person, standing upright, examining files inside an open drawer. He looked completely normal, like you or me. He was dressed in modern clothes, not scrubs, not a lab coat, not a uniform. What struck me immediately was that he didn't look like anyone who should have been back there. People who worked in that area had a certain look, badges, specific clothing, familiar faces. This guy didn't match any of that. And more importantly, I had never seen anyone there that late before. Ever. For a split second, my body reacted before my brain did. My heart jumped. My grip tightened on the gurney, and I felt that sudden rush of adrenaline you get when you're startled badly. It took me a moment to steady myself. I laughed a little, mostly out of nerves, and said something like, "You'll have to forgive me. You almost gave me a heart attack." He didn't respond. He didn't turn around. He didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to register that I had spoken. He just stood there, staring at the open file in front of him, completely absorbed. I figured maybe he hadn't heard me. The building had a hum to it. Ventilation systems, refrigeration units, distant machinery. It wasn't unreasonable to think he might have missed what I said. So I spoke again. I apologized for being startled and said I'd just be finishing up and heading out. Again, no response. Not even a shift in posture. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink noticeably. He just kept looking at the file. At this point, I started to feel uneasy, but not afraid. More confused than anything. I thought maybe he was deaf, or deeply focused, or socially awkward. Or maybe he was some overnight administrative staff member I hadn't met yet. I decided not to push it. I finished wheeling the gurney back to the van, loaded it inside, and closed the large garage door from the inside. The entire time, the man remained exactly where he was. Same position, same open file, same complete lack of acknowledgement. Before leaving, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. It was down the hall, past the administrative area. I didn't want to just disappear without saying anything, so I told him I was going to the restroom and would be right back. Again, no response. I remember thinking, maybe he really can't hear me. Maybe he's just working and ignoring everything else. So I went to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, and headed back toward the garage area to finish locking up. That's when things became truly strange. The man was gone. The file cabinet drawer he had been examining was still open. The file was still sitting there, exactly as he had left it. But he himself was nowhere to be seen. I stopped and listened. The hallway was silent. I hadn't heard any footsteps while I was in the bathroom. I hadn't heard a door open or close. The only way out of that area would have required him to walk past the bathroom or through a door I would have heard. I checked the surrounding rooms. Empty. I checked the hallway. Empty. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all, aside from the open file cabinet. A chill ran through me, not sharp, but slow and creeping. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he had moved quietly. Maybe he knew another exit I didn't. Maybe he was staff and just didn't care to interact. Still, something felt off. I double-checked everything I was responsible for. The freezer was locked. The doors were secure. Nothing had been disturbed. Everything was exactly as it should be. Before leaving, I announced out loud that I was locking up and setting the alarm, just in case the man was somewhere nearby and needed to hear it. No response. I set the alarm, locked the building, got into the van, and left. I drove away feeling unsettled in a way that stuck with me. Not terrified, not panicked, just deeply unsettled. The kind of feeling that doesn't fade immediately. The kind that makes you replay details over and over in your head. Who was he? Why didn't he respond? How did he leave without making a sound? Why was he there at 1 a.m, and why, out of all places, was he examining files in a building full of the dead? I never got answers to those questions. No one ever mentioned an overnight worker matching that description. No one ever said they'd been there late. I never saw him again. I've had other strange moments during my time in that job. Odd feelings, unexplainable sounds. Moments where places felt heavier than they should have. But nothing else came close to that night. Even now, years later, I can picture it perfectly. The lighting, the silence, the way he stood there utterly indifferent to my presence, the open file cabinet, the emptiness afterward. I don't know who he was, or what he was, or why he was there. I just know that some experiences don't ask to be explained. They simply sit with you, waiting, like an unanswered question you carry for the rest of your life, and that is one of mine. I have a few other memories from that job if anyone ever wants to hear them. None of them are quite like that one, though. I've seen a lot of things working in mortuaries. Things that most people would probably consider far more disturbing than this story. Things involving trauma, decay, violence, and damage to the human body that never really leave you once you've seen them up close. I've handled bodies that were barely recognizable as human anymore. I've smelled things that don't wash out of your clothes no matter how many times you clean them. I've had nights where I went home and sat in silence, trying to shake off what I'd just witnessed. And yet, out of all of that, this is the one moment that still stands out to me. Not because it was especially gory or graphic, but because it felt personal in a way nothing else ever did. It reached past the job, past the professional distance I had built, and hit something deeper. Something I wasn't prepared for. At the time, I was working at a mortuary, and part of my job involved transporting the deceased from one place to another. One of the more common pickups was from the medical examiner's office. When someone dies under certain circumstances, their body goes there first, and once they're released, we're called to bring them to the mortuary. When you pick up a body from the medical examiner, you're given a receipt. It's a formal document that lists all of the personal belongings that are still with the deceased. Jewelry, piercings, clothing, watches, rings, necklaces, anything like that. It's your responsibility to make sure everything listed on that receipt is accounted for once the body arrives. It's a simple but important step, and one you don't skip. That day felt completely normal at first. I went to the medical examiner's office. He assigned the paperwork, loaded the body into the transport vehicle, and drove back to the mortuary. Nothing about the drive stood out. I wasn't distracted or uneasy. It was just another call, another body, another name on a form. By that point in my career, I had done this hundreds of times. When I arrived back at the mortuary, I brought the body into the prep area. The room was quiet, clean, and brightly lit. Stainless steel surfaces, white walls, the faint smell of disinfectant that never really goes away. I clipped the receipt to the counter and got ready to do my checks. I unzipped the body bag. The moment I saw his face, my brain stalled. At first, it didn't fully register. It was like my mind couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. I remember thinking, very briefly, that I was looking at a reflection or some kind of trick of the light, that maybe I was just tired, that my brain was filling in details that weren't really there, but the longer I looked, the worse it got. The man inside the body bag looked almost exactly like me. Not in a general way, not in a we could be brothers way. It was far too specific for that. He looked like my age. His facial structure was extremely similar to mine. Same general build, same kind of jawline, same nose. Even his expression, relaxed in death, felt uncomfortably familiar. Then I noticed his hair, long, the same length as mine, the same style I wore every day. I remember staring at it and feeling this cold wave of disbelief wash over me. Hair is such a personal thing, such a deliberate choice, and here it was, matching mine almost perfectly. Then my eyes moved to his body. He had tattoos. Not the same designs, but in similar places. Arms, chest, areas that matched my own. Close enough that my stomach twisted when I saw them. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. It was layering, similarities stacking on top of each other until it felt overwhelming. And then there was the jewelry, rings, necklaces. The same general style I was wearing that very day. Minimal, understated. The kind of look that reflects personal taste rather than fashion trends. It felt like looking at another version of myself who had made slightly different choices, but ended up in the same place. Zipped into a body bag. I didn't move. I stood there holding the zipper, my hand frozen in place. My chest felt tight. My breathing slowed without me realizing it. The room felt suddenly too quiet, like all sound had been sucked out of it. I wasn't scared in the way people expect fear to feel. I wasn't jumping or panicking. I was unraveling. All the emotional distance I'd carefully built over years of doing this job vanished in an instant. Every mental barrier I had put up between myself and the dead collapsed. This wasn't just someone else anymore. This was a reflection, a reminder, a possibility. I started thinking things I had never allowed myself to think at work. That could be me. That could be my body on this table. That could be my jewelry listed on a receipt. That could be someone else standing where I was, checking off my belongings and zipping me back up. It felt like staring into a future I wasn't supposed to see. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt warped. It could have been seconds or minutes. My mind was spiraling, bouncing between disbelief, dread, and this strange detached curiosity about how easily the roles could reverse. Then the embalmer walked in. He came in like he always did, casual, comfortable in the space. He greeted me by name and asked how things were going, not really paying attention to what was on the table yet. Then his eyes dropped to the open body bag. He stopped mid-sentence. There was a pause. Then he said my name again, slower this time, followed by, "Holy shit." He stepped closer, leaned in slightly, and stared. "That guy looks like you." Hearing someone else say it out loud was almost worse than realizing it myself. It confirmed that this wasn't just in my head. This wasn't stress or imagination or projection. The resemblance was real enough to stop another professional dead in his tracks. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then, somehow, the routine took over again. I finished checking the belongings, my hands moving automatically, even though my thoughts were still scattered. Everything listed on the receipt was there. Jewelry matched, nothing missing. I closed the body bag and stepped back, trying to reclaim the distance I'd lost. But it didn't fully come back. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I did my job, I went home, I ate dinner, I slept. But something had shifted. That image stayed with me. The face, the hair, the tattoos, the jewelry. The feeling of standing over what looked like myself and realizing how thin the line really was. Out of all the cases I've worked, that is the only one that followed me into my dreams. In the nightmare, the roles are reversed. I'm the one lying in the body bag. I can't move, I can't speak. I'm aware but powerless. And standing over me is the deceased man, the one who looks like me. He's calm, professional. He's holding a receipt, checking off my belongings one by one. My rings, my necklace, my tattoos, my hair. He zips the bag. I wake up every time with my heart pounding, the image burned into my mind. I've seen worse things in this job, things that would make most people look away. But none of them ever reached inside me the way that moment did. Because gore is external. It's something you witness, something you process and move past. Seeing yourself in a body bag is different. It forces you to confront the fact that death isn't distant. It isn't abstract. It doesn't belong only to strangers. It wears familiar faces. It shares your taste, your style, your age, and one day, whether you're ready or not, someone else may be standing exactly where you stood, opening a bag, checking a receipt, and seeing you the way I saw him. That's the one that stayed with me. And I don't think it's ever really going to leave. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. I used to work in a nursing home, the kind of place that feels quiet even when it's busy. During the day, there was noise, visitors, televisions playing, staff talking, meals being served. But at night, especially after midnight, everything changed. The building felt heavier, slower, like it was holding its breath. The lights were dimmed, the halls echoed softly, and every sound carried farther than it should have. I worked nights often, which meant I saw a different side of the place than most people did. You get used to strange things working in a nursing home. Residents talk in their sleep. Some cry out. Some become confused or agitated when the sun goes down. Hallucinations are common among the elderly, especially those with dementia or other cognitive decline. You learn to respond calmly, to reassure, to redirect, to not react with fear even when the stories are unsettling. That's why at first no one paid much attention to what some of the residents were saying. Certain residents, always in certain rooms, would complain about a man being in their room at night. They said he stood near the bed, or watched from the corner, or leaned too close. Sometimes they said he smiled at them. Sometimes they said he just stared. Staff would reassure them, tell them they were safe, check the room, turn on a light, sit with them until they calmed down. We assumed it was confusion, hallucinations, night terrors, sundowning. It fit the pattern we were used to. There was no reason, at the time, to think otherwise. But the complaints kept happening. It wasn't every resident, it wasn't every room. It was always the same handful of rooms, always at night, and always described in a strangely similar way. Still, we chalked it up to coincidence. When you work in healthcare long enough, you become very good at explaining things away. It's a survival skill. I didn't see anything myself for a long time. Then one night, I was alone in the dining room. It was around 1 in the morning. Most residents were asleep, and the building was quiet except for the low hum of machinery and the occasional distant sound from a hallway. I was mopping the dining room floor, going through the slow, repetitive motions that help pass the time on night shifts. The dining room had huge windows that overlooked the garden. During the day, they let in a lot of light. At night, they turned into dark mirrors. Outside was pitch black. Inside, the lighting was low and yellow, just enough to see what you were doing. As I worked, I started to feel it. That horrible feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, even though you can't explain why. The kind of feeling that doesn't come from a thought, but from your body. Your shoulders tense, your skin prickles, your heart rate changes slightly. You tell yourself you're being silly, but the feeling doesn't go away. I tried to ignore it. I kept mopping, moving back and forth across the floor, but the sensation only grew stronger. It felt close, immediate, like something was right behind me. Finally, I looked up. In the reflection of the window, I saw a man standing behind me. It happened fast, just seconds, but those seconds are burned into my memory in a way I can't fully describe. He was dressed in an old-fashioned brown suit. Not modern, not something you'd see anyone wear now. And on his head was a bowler hat. His posture was upright, deliberate, like he was standing there on purpose, waiting to be seen. What struck me most was his face. He had the cruelest expression I have ever seen. Not anger, not rage, cruelty. His eyes were fixed on me, and he was grinning. The grin was wrong. His mouth was too big, stretched wider than it should have been, like it didn't belong on a human face. It wasn't a friendly smile or a trick of the light. It felt intentional, like he was enjoying my fear. I froze. In that moment, my mind struggled to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared at the reflection, my brain trying to find a rational explanation that would make the image disappear. Then instinct kicked in, and I turned around. There was no one there. The dining room was empty, completely empty. No movement, no sound, nothing out of place. The mop bucket sat where I had left it. The chairs were pushed in. The doors were closed. There was nowhere anyone could have gone in the time it took me to turn. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my ears. My hands were shaking. I stood there for a moment trying to calm myself, trying to convince myself that it had been a reflection trick, a shadow, my imagination playing games on me in the middle of the night. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. What I had seen was too clear, too detailed, too deliberate. I finished my task as quickly as I could and left the dining room. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't want to sound foolish. I didn't want to be dismissed or told I was overtired or stressed. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it wouldn't leave. After that night, I paid more attention. When residents mentioned the man again, I listened more carefully. I didn't interrupt. I didn't brush it off. I asked gentle questions. What did he look like? Where did he stand? What did he do? And that's when it became impossible to ignore. They all described the same man, a man in old-fashioned clothing, a brown suit, a hat, a grin that made them uncomfortable. Some said his smile was wrong. Some said his eyes were cruel. Some said he liked to scare them, not hurt them, just frighten them. They weren't vague descriptions. They were consistent. And they matched exactly what I had seen. The realization made my stomach drop. These were residents who had never spoken to each other about this. Some were in different wings. Some had limited mobility. Some could barely communicate at all. And yet they described the same presence, the same behavior, the same feeling of being watched and toyed with. He didn't touch them. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching, enjoying their fear. Once I noticed the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. The complaints came more often than I had realized before. It wasn't constant, but it was frequent enough to feel deliberate. Always at night, always in those rooms, always when people were most vulnerable. I never saw him again the way I did that night, but I felt him. In certain hallways, in certain corners, in the way the air seemed to change sometimes for no obvious reason. Working there became harder after that. I still did my job. I still reassured residents. I still followed protocol. But something had shifted. I no longer dismissed their fear. I sat with them longer. I turned on lights. I stayed until they felt calmer. Not because policy said I should, but because I believed them. Whatever that presence was, it seemed to thrive on fear, on vulnerability, on being unseen and unchallenged. I never tried to explain it. I still don't. I don't claim to know what it was or why it was there. All I know is what I saw, what I felt, and what too many other people experienced independently for it to be coincidence. That face stays with me. The grin, the eyes, the sense of deliberate malice. Not rage or chaos, but enjoyment. As if frightening people was the point. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about that nursing home at night, about the residents who couldn't leave, about how easily their fear was dismissed because of their age or their diagnosis, about how many things we ignore because they don't fit neatly into explanations we're comfortable with. Whatever that man was, he didn't need to hurt anyone to do damage. He just needed to be seen. And once you've seen something like that, once you've locked eyes with something that radiates that kind of cruelty, you don't forget it. You carry it with you. And you listen more closely when people tell you they're afraid. A large part of my extended family lives on the same piece of land. It is not just one house, but several separate homes spread across the property, each belonging to different family members. Because everyone lives so close to one another, visiting back and forth has always been a normal part of daily life. People stop by unannounced. Children run from house to house. and family gatherings often happen without much planning. Growing up, it felt like a small neighborhood that only belonged to us. Out of all the houses on the property, my great-aunt's house has always stood out. Not because it looks strange or old, but because it has a reputation that everyone in the family knows about. It is widely believed to be the place where a ghost lives, or at least visits very often. This belief has been passed down through stories, personal experiences, and quiet warnings given to kids as they grew up. No one ever officially announced it as fact, but over time, it became something most people accepted in their own way. The ghost is always described the same way. According to family members, he looks like a man from the early 1900s. People say he wears one of those old-fashioned hats that were common back then, the kind you might see in black and white photos. His appearance never changes in these stories, which is one reason that people take them seriously. It is not a vague shadow or strange shape. It is always described as a man, dressed in clothing from another time, standing quietly and watching. He does not do anything violent or aggressive. Instead, his presence is usually noticed through small but unsettling actions. He makes the sound of footsteps moving through the house even when no one else is around. Sometimes people hear him walking down the hallway late at night when everyone is asleep. Other times, he appears briefly at the far end of the hallway, just standing there before disappearing. Doors will slowly open by themselves, just a crack, as if someone is peeking into the room and then changing their mind. One of the most unusual things about him is his connection to smoking. My great-aunt is extremely strict about her house rules, and smoking is absolutely not allowed inside. She has always been clear about this, and everyone in the family knows it. That is why it stands out so much when the smell of cigarette smoke suddenly fills a room in her house. There is no logical explanation for it. No one nearby is smoking, and the smell appears suddenly and then lingers. When this happens, my great-aunt is convinced it is the ghost. She does not panic or act afraid. Instead, she reacts the same way she would if a real person had broken one of her rules. She will loudly tell him to stop it and knock it off. She scolds him as if he were an annoying guest who knows better. And almost every time after she says something, the smell goes away. This detail has become one of the strongest reasons people believe the stories. It feels too specific and consistent to be a coincidence. What makes it even stranger is that he only listens to her. Other family members have complained about the smell or asked it to stop, but nothing happens. Only when my great-aunt speaks does the activity stop. It is as if he recognizes her authority in the house and respects it, even though he does not fully follow her rules unless she reminds him. Every once in a while, the ghost does something different. When a family member leaves my great-aunt's house to go back to their own home somewhere else on the property, he sometimes follows them. People have noticed that after visiting her house, strange things will start happening in their own home for the next couple of days. Doors open on their own. Footsteps can be heard at night. That same heavy feeling of being watched settles into the house. He never stays long. After a few days, the activity fades, and everything returns to normal. It is always assumed that he has gone back to my great-aunt's house, his usual place. This pattern has repeated enough times that family members now joke about being careful when leaving her house, just in case he decides to come along. Not everyone finds this amusing. One of my aunts in particular hates it when he follows her. She claims she can always tell when he is around. The air feels different, and the house never feels fully empty, even when she is alone. What bothers her most is the feeling that he watches her, especially when she is vulnerable. She has said more than once that she can sense him looking at her while she is in the shower. That feeling alone is enough to make her uncomfortable and angry, even if nothing physically happens. As for me, I do not fully believe in ghosts. I have always been skeptical about things like that, and try to look for logical explanations first. Still, there is something about this particular story that makes me want to believe. There are simply too many similar accounts from different people, told years apart, yet describing the same details. It feels less like a single story that grew over time, and more like many separate experiences that all point to the same thing. There have also been moments in my own life that make the idea harder to dismiss. I have seen and experienced things at the main house that I cannot easily explain. Small things, nothing dramatic, but enough to leave an impression. A door opening when no one else was around. Footsteps when everyone was accounted for. A sudden feeling that someone was nearby when I knew I was alone. What really adds weight to the story is how common these experiences are among the grandchildren in the family. Oh, almost every grandchild who was raised on that property and spent time in that house has seen him at least once while growing up. These were not stories told by adults to scare kids. Many of us saw him before we even knew about the ghost stories. Only later did we realize that others had seen the same thing. Some saw him standing quietly in the hallway. Others caught a glimpse of him turning a corner or disappearing through a doorway. No one remembers him speaking or moving toward them. He was always just there, observing, like someone checking in and then moving on. As kids, we did not know how to explain it, and many of us stayed quiet about it for years. Looking back, it is strange how normal it all felt at the time. Growing up around those stories and experiences made them feel like just another part of life on the property. It was not something we talked about every day, but it was always there in the background. A shared understanding that one house held something unusual, something older than all of us. Whether the ghost is real or not, the stories have become part of our family history. They connect generations and experiences in a way few other things do. Even those who do not fully believe still listen when the stories are told, because there is a consistency that is hard to ignore. I may never know for sure what causes the footsteps, the doors, or the smell of smoke. But I like the idea that if there is a ghost, it is this one. A quiet presence from another time, tied to one house and one woman he still listens to. In a strange way, it makes the property feel more alive, as if the past never fully left and still walks the hallways now and then. I used to work as a nurse on an oncology ward, a place where life and death existed side by side every single day. Anyone who has worked in that environment knows how emotionally heavy it can be. You learn very quickly how to stay professional, how to keep going, and how to create a small emotional distance so you can do your job properly. Even so, the ward never really lets you forget where you are. It is a place of hope, fear, loss, and quiet acceptance all mixed together. On our ward, we had several side rooms that were set aside specifically for patients who were nearing the end of their lives. These rooms were usually used for patients receiving palliative care, people who were no longer being treated with the aim of recovery, but instead comfort. The atmosphere in those rooms was always different from the rest of the ward. They were quieter, more private, and carried a kind of stillness that you could feel the moment you stepped inside. One particular patient had been with us for quite a few weeks. Over that time, many of the staff had gotten to know them well, including myself and a student nurse I was mentoring at the time. When you care for someone day after day, especially in palliative care, a connection naturally forms. You learn their routines, their preferences, and sometimes their stories. Even though we all know the likely outcome, it never makes the loss any easier when the time finally comes. Early one morning, the patient passed away peacefully. The night staff had already completed the necessary last offices, ensuring the patient was treated with dignity and respect. Shortly after, the body was transferred to the hospital morgue. And by the time the day shift fully settled in, the hardest part of the process was already done. What remained was the quieter, more routine task of clearing the room. Clearing a side room after a patient has died is something that becomes almost automatic when you work in a hospital. Personal belongings need to be gathered, the room needs to be tidied, and everything prepared so it can eventually be used again. It is not a task anyone enjoys, but it is one that must be done, and most nurses approach it calmly and methodically. That morning, I was busy preparing for the drug round. It was a hectic shift, as many of them are, and I needed to stay focused. I decided to ask the student nurse I was mentoring to clear the room. She had known the patient fairly well, and had spent a good amount of time caring for them. She was capable, sensible, and had shown herself to be emotionally steady throughout her placement. I asked her if she felt comfortable doing it, and she assured me she was fine. She went into the side room alone while I continued with my duties. At the time, there was nothing unusual about this. Students are often involved in tasks like this as part of their learning, and I trusted her judgment and professionalism. For the next 10 minutes or so, everything carried on as normal. Then a colleague approached me with a look on her face that immediately made my stomach drop. She told me that my student nurse had come rushing out of the side room, completely pale, shaking, and visibly distressed. Apparently, she had gone straight into the staff room and was sobbing uncontrollably. This was completely out of character for her, which is what made it so alarming. I handed over what I was doing and went straight to the staff room to find her. When I walked in, she was sitting down, crying hard, struggling to catch her breath. Her face was drained of color, and she looked genuinely shaken, in a way I had not seen before. This was not a moment of stress or overwhelm. This was real fear. I sat down with her and gently asked her what had happened. At first, she struggled to speak, trying to calm herself enough to explain. Eventually, through tears and broken sentences, she told me what she had experienced. She said she had been in the bathroom area of the side room, clearing the sink and wiping down surfaces. It was a small, enclosed space, and everything had felt quiet, almost too quiet. As she was working, she happened to glance up toward the mirror above the sink. What she saw in that reflection made her freeze. According to her, the deceased patient was standing behind her, visible in the mirror, looking directly at her over her shoulder. She described the image clearly, without hesitation. It was not vague or shadowy. It was the patient as she remembered them, unmistakable and familiar. For a brief moment, they locked eyes through the mirror. She said she turned around instantly, expecting to see something there, but of course, the room was empty. The bathroom was exactly as it should have been. No one else was present. The patient's bed in the main room was empty, and the silence felt heavier than before. That was when the fear fully hit her. She dropped what she was doing and left the room immediately, barely aware of how fast she was moving, until she found herself in the staff room. And by the time she reached it, she was shaking and crying, overwhelmed by what she had just seen. As she told me this, I watched her closely. She was not exaggerating or trying to dramatize the experience. She was genuinely distressed, reliving it as she spoke. This was not someone prone to overreacting or being hysterical. She was a sensible, level-headed young woman who had handled difficult situations well throughout her placement. I did my best to calm her down, reassuring her and staying with her until her breathing slowed and she was able to compose herself. I did not challenge her account or try to immediately explain it away. In moments like that, the priority is the person in front of you, not rational debate. For the remainder of her placement on that ward, she refused to go anywhere near that side room. No amount of reassurance could convince her otherwise. She carried out all her other duties professionally, but that particular room was completely off limits for her. The fear never fully left her, and I could not blame her for that. As for me, I did not know what to think. Working in healthcare, you see and hear many things that do not fit neatly into explanations. Hospitals are places where intense emotions, trauma, and final moments are concentrated. Whether what she saw was something supernatural or a manifestation of stress, grief, or the environment itself, I cannot say for certain. What I do know is that the experience deeply affected her, and it was real to her in a way that could not be dismissed lightly. Even now, thinking back on it sends a chill through me. There was something unsettling about how clearly she described it and how strongly it stayed with her afterward. That side room, like many others in hospitals around the world, continued to be used, cleaned, and reassigned to new patients. Life on the ward moved forward, as it always does. But every time I passed that door after that incident, I could not help but remember her pale face and the way her voice shook as she told me what she had seen. Working in an oncology ward teaches you many things about life, death, and the spaces in between. Some experiences stay with you long after you leave the job behind. That morning, and what happened in that quiet side room, is one of those moments I will never forget. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.